Yes, let's proceed.
Okay, so that's fine. Thank you for this opportunity to be able to continue creating awareness about GMOs and demystifying the misinformation about GMOs that is out there. The outline of my talk will be that I will speak about one of the new breeding technology called plant tissue culture. I'll be able to define GMOs for the extension officers to understand this, and then try to bring in what are these agricultural challenges that may be addressed by the new breeding tool, genetic engineering, and then try to create awareness on some of the concerns that are raised by small-scale farmers and the public on GMOs, and I will conclude. So plant tissue culture is actually a biotechnological tool in which you can use any part of the plant, be it pollen, embryo, protoplast, to be able to obtain a developed plant from either a cell, and therefore we call that somatic embryogenesis, or from a tissue or organ that has many cells, and we call that organogenesis. And therefore, at Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology, we are leader in tissue culture of banana, and therefore it has revolutionized food security across the region. And the message I wanted to pass across is that the tissue culture bananas are not GMO because there is no direct exchange of genetic material during the regeneration process. Then I want to bring in the element of genetic engineering, and then try to explain what is this natural GMO, or naturally genetically modified organisms. And throughout history and evolution, we have had lateral gene transfer. And that's why nowadays the cultivated sweet potato genome contains genes of Acrobacterium. We also have the human genome that has been sequenced. On your left there, you will see that there are genes, about 40 genes from bacteria that were transferred to humans. And also, you will see on the right of this slide that there are many, many genes that were transferred from plants, fungi, and also bacteria to the insects. And therefore, this transfer of genetic material between unrelated species has been going on naturally in the field, and it's the one that has been driving the evolution, adaptation, and diversification of plants. So the genetic engineering or modification of organism is not something that is new. It is something that has been happening throughout evolution. In terms of trying to define what is genetic modification, I've tried to compare what is classical breeding vis-a-vis genetic modification. So on your left, you will see that if you have specific traits that you're interested in, you can cross two related or unrelated plants that are sexually compatible, and then the progeny will actually be able to obtain the traits that you're interested in. Now, this process here is tedious, it's long, it takes many, many years, 10 to 15 years to obtain the traits you want. It's not robust and therefore very expensive. But with genetic modification, you can see on your right, the first cartoon is a bacteria in which we obtain a gene of interest and we transfer into plants, and that plant becomes genetically modified. So the plant that receives genetic material from another organisms, whether it is related or unrelated, it is called GMO because it is genetic or genome has been modified by introducing into its genome a new genetic material from another organism, or that is related or not related at all. And so in this country, we have a number of agricultural challenges that GMO can be able to resolve. And one of it is aflatoxin contamination, which in fact is a risk factor for cancer. And therefore, it has been demonstrated that genetically modified maize or even peanuts provides protection against aflatoxin contamination by up to 90%. Then we have the challenges of weeds. And if you see the picture on the right there, the farmer was actually unable to control the weed by whatever means. And therefore, genetic modification has found that we can be able to genetically engineer our crops so that when you spray the herbicides, it kills the weeds and protects the plant. And this improves production, productivity to the benefit of our small-scale farmers. And then the other devastating challenge that farmers are facing in this country is insect pests, especially the fall armyworm and also the maize stake borer. And therefore, if you are able to engineer maize to express a specific gene, this maize becomes permanently protected from the insect pest. And therefore, this has huge benefit for our small-scale farmers. And then we have crop diseases, like for example, maize. We have the maize lethal necrosis disease, which is a threat to maize production and productivity. We can be able to develop resistant maize plants by using genetic modification. And this also has proved to be very useful for our small-scale farmers. Then the nutritional problems are, of course, malnutrition in this country, especially, for example, deficiency in vitamins A. And therefore, these vitamins are necessary for growth and development of humans, and genetic engineering technology can be able to be used to engineer either rice or maize to be enriched with vitamins so that we can tackle the challenges of malnutrition. And in fact, we, the scientists, have been able to develop edible vaccines through genetic engineering, as you can see the cartoon on your right in this figure. And then we have challenges that are brought about by climate change, including drought stress. And so WEMA, a project in this country, combined both classical breeding and genetic modification to develop a maize plant that was tolerant to drought stress and also resistant to insect pests. And this has actually helped farmers to grow this maize in limited water conditions. And so if you look at the percentage of main biotechnology crops in 2017, of course, up to now, more have been added. So we have soybean, cotton, maize, and canola. And also we have even tomatoes, many of them that have been genetically engineered, but these are the ones that have been commercialized. And so just to bring it, the issue of the PT, corn and PT cotton, the mechanism of action of the cry protein is very specific in the sense that it needs specific receptors in the gut of the maize stalk borer to be able to kill the maize stalk borer. And therefore, this protein does not target any other insect other than maize stalk borer. So the organic farmers use this formulation in their biopesticides to be able to spray to crops, and the mechanism of action is the same. Scientists, on the other hand, instead of spraying, they engineer using genetic modification so that the plant becomes a GMO that then permanently resists pests, especially the maize stem stalk borer. Now, what are these misinformation about GMOs? Indeed, misinformation refers to statements that are contrary to the scientific consensus for the safety of genetic engineering. And if you go through literature, you realize that, in fact, about 250 million of people have been they have been misinformed about issues surrounding genetically modified crops. And this is to the detriment of our small scale farmers who are looking forward for this particular technology to be able to develop new crop varieties that are resistant to pests, drought, and also caused by climate changes. So one of the misinformation that of late in this country is whether GMOs will make Kenyan men to grow breasts and also women to grow beards. And so here, this is a question that needs to be discussed outside the GMO story, because this is a question of developmental biology. And there's no evidence whatsoever that if you eat GMO, there is an induction of probably growth hormones that may lead to the growth of breasts or even beards, as it has been claimed. So this is a lie, which is probably spread by sensational statements or alarmists to be able to cause panic among the people and our small-scale farmers to reject a technology that has huge benefits. The other concern is whether GMO, if you eat them, causes cancer. In fact, yes, it's true that there was a paper that demonstrated this in rats, but it did not find a global scientific consensus. It was discredited, it was retracted, and therefore up to date, there is no additional data or evidence that if you eat GMO, you will have to cause or get cancer. The only way you can get cancer is when you eat maize that is intoxicated or infected by aflatoxin. And then the other concerns are really GMO are safe. Yes, they're safe because of the fact that we have regulatory oversights towards the safety of the GMOs. We have biofortification to improve the nutritional quality of crops. We have the prevention of aflatoxin, and therefore GMO is safe and beneficial as a tool in the guess to sustainably feed the growing population in Kenya and the world. Will GMOs take away choice and exploit small-scale farmers? That's not possible, because the development of the GMO is actually in partnership with private and public companies or institutions, including small-scale NGOs and also farmers and community-based organization. And it's in this country, it's funded by public money, and therefore the products developed will be for public good. And then there is another issue about whether GMOs will actually destroy or cause harm to unintended targets such as birds, snakes, soil microorganisms. And this has not been demonstrated so far, and that in fact, even the soil microorganisms, there is no evidence that the cry protein from a genetically modified maize persists in the soil, even when consecutively this GMO maize has been grown for more than 3 years. So there is no scientific evidence of harm to snakes, birds, or microorganisms in the soil. So this is also a question about whether GMOs will contaminate wild population. Indeed, it has been demonstrated that pollen can carry DNA and then be able to transfer them to wild population or to related organisms. So a genetically engineered maize pollen can actually move to a non-genetically engineered maize and transfer that gene of interest. But the scientists have actually developed the principle of coexistence, where the small-scale farmers will have a choice to either take up the organic products or GMOs or non-GMOs. And therefore, scientists propose that we do what we call physical separation between non-GMOs and GMOs. And you can see the table there with the recommended distances of separation between GMO and non-GMOs, and the cross-fertilization level that is realized. And you'll notice that that cross-fertilization level is negligible, and therefore there should be no concern of GMOs contaminating wild population or related organisms or plants when they are separately planted. So will genes from GMOs impact biodiversity? This is also another very big question and concern. Recently, last month, the COP15 resolution in Montana, Canada, resolved to hold and reverse biodiversity laws to work on restoration, to reduce the use of pesticides. Indeed, if you have GMO maize that has been engineered to resist insect pests, you will not be able to use any pesticides to control insect pests. So this is key in protecting our biodiversity. As I also said, that we do have also bacteria within our soil microbiome, and that there has been no demonstration of the persistence or accumulation of cry protein in the soil in fields planted with a GMO maize, and therefore there will be no impact on biodiversity. Are GMOs a only solution to food security and food sovereignty? I argue it's no, because the GMO technology has just come in to complement other breeding tools, including organic farming and also those that use agroecological farming practices. And therefore, we advocate for the fact that this genetic modification be part and parcel of the tools in order to help farmers resolve the many agricultural challenges that we are having. Now we have also the terminator technology that many of the rejectionists of the technology take advantage of, that this technology will only benefit the multinationals at the expense of our farmers, and that they demonize the technology to the detriment of our small-scale farmers. So the message is very clear. There is a moratorium on the design, development, and deployment of the terminator technology. The GMO maize that is being developed in this country will not have this technology, and that GMO technology was given to Africa royalty-free, so you can be able to use the technology without paying any multinationals. In fact, also, if you plant a GMO maize and also even a hybrid maize, it doesn't mean that if you regrow the seeds after the first harvest, they will not be germinating. If you replant, they will germinate after the very first harvest. So this concern that is raised by the opponents of the technology is not valid. And therefore, in conclusion, I will argue that let us as a country listen to the science, trust science and innovation, that it is this science that informs policy. Trust also in our regulatory agencies and oversight bodies, because they're the ones who check, and they are actually legally constituted to be able to ensure safety of any products, including genetic modification. And therefore, because we advocate the fact that all these tools have to come together, it's important that farmers also adopt crops that are resilient to climate change, so that they can be able to ensure future food security, nutritional quality for our future generation. And therefore, for those who still argue about for or against the GMO, it's very clear that Mark Linus, who was actually an opponent of this particular technology, got converted, and he told his colleagues that they are entitled to their views, but they must know that the views against GMO, by now, they are not supported by science. They are just sensational statements, alarmist statements that have no scientific basis whatsoever. And therefore, GMOs have made a significant contribution, especially in increasing crop productivity. They have also provided a better environment. They have also helped alleviate poverty and hunger, which is in line with the Sustainable Development Goals 1 and 2. And for that matter, therefore, I thank you very much for the opportunity to continue combating the myths around GMO and creating awareness on GMO. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Akali. Thank you. You have a clap from all of us. It's only that virtually it's a bit of a challenge. We have had a very good sensitization process, and you have mentioned quite a number of very important areas. Participants, if you have got any issues, you can be noting them down so that you'll be able to have a session for discussion. So at this time, I would also like to invite, Sue Kahubi, who will also be able to give us the alternative and see other information, a piece of information, which we as extension officers can be able to put together, and we can be able to advise our farmers based on the information we have. So I had given the profile of Sue Kahubi. He has a lot of experience in the soil science and in that area. So I want to introduce her, to welcome her to be able to give us her presentation. So Sue, you are welcome. You can unmute yourself and then you share the screen and you go ahead.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I'm just getting my screen on. There we go. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to do a presentation during this important discussion on GMOs. My name, as mentioned, is Sue Kahubi. I'm the CEO of Green Dreams Tech Limited and the founder of the award-winning digital agricultural extension service, which is currently used by over 1.7 million smallholder farmers, called iCow. I'm also Kenya's first certified soil food web lab technician through the famous Elaine Ingham Soil Food Web School, one of only 13 on the African continent. I've been studying and practicing regenerative agriculture for 22 years, and I hope my presentation and experience will help shed light on the real drivers of food security in Kenya. Our data collected on iCow from thousands of farmers, smallholder farmers in Kenya, does not support the notion that the solution to food security for Kenya is in the adoption of GMOs. In addition to lack of water exacerbated by climate change, our data suggests that our food insecurity is due to failed soils, and that this has been caused over the years by our agricultural practices of tillage and use of synthetic and toxic inputs. These have devastated the soil microbiome, which underpins soil health. Kenyan soils are ailing, we all know that. I'll also show that by following regenerative agricultural practices, soils begin to heal and crop yields increase in as short a time as one growing season. I'll end my presentation with a few recommendations on how I think Kenya can achieve food security by adopting and prioritizing regenerative agriculture and prioritizing the health of the soil microbiome. So this slide is from Dr. David Johnson, a molecular biologist conducting research at the Institute for Sustainable Agricultural Research at New Mexico State University. He's also an adjunct professor at the Center of Regenerative Agriculture and Resilient Systems at California State University.
Excuse me, it's not possible to see the slide.
Excuse, the slide is not moving.
Is it not moving?
Slide. Yes.
Can you see the slide now?
Yeah, now we can see it, yes.
Okay, I don't know why it didn't move, but we'll see moving on. Dr. Johnson did an experiment to find out which nutrients were responsible for influencing yields in crops. He grew crops using 10 different types of compost, and then he tracked the growth of the crops and compared them with the different mineral nutrients. He thought the biggest contributor to crop yield would be nitrogen. His results showed, however, that the nitrogen quantities didn't affect the crop growth as expected. And as you can see from the graph, the highest growth was achieved in the first two samples. However, they had the lowest levels of nitrogen. Samples 4 and 5 had the highest levels of nitrogen yet, and their yields were lower. The same example was carried out and checking for potassium, then phosphorus, and even organic matter, with the results showing that the yield increases were seemingly not related to these either. Can you see this next slide? Did my slide change?
No, it didn't. Now you only have this David Johnson's slide.
I'm not sure why this is happening, but I want you to be on this slide now. Can you see it, this slide, the different one now? Whoops, what happened there? Can you see this one?
Yes, we can see the phagobacterial issue.
Okay, great, okay. Okay, so intrigued with the results, he finally looked at the microbes, and what he found was that the ratio between the microorganisms, in particular the fungal and bacterial ratio, seems to be driving yields. The discovery led to new research, and it underpins a science around regenerative agriculture, today based on the soil food web. Can you see the next slide?
Is stuck there at the phagobacterial issue.
Okay, so what I'm going to do here,
Yeah, we have the next one now.
I have to keep going backwards and forwards to slides like this. Okay. So for us to understand the fungal and racial bacteria relationship today, we need to go back about 500 million years to where and why this mutualistic relationship happened and how it shaped the world as we know it, and how we risk reversing our planet to becoming inhospitable simply by destroying the soil microbiome. Back then, 500 million years ago, the carbon dioxide levels were 4,000 parts per million, compared to our almost intolerable 420 parts per million today. And the only forms of life were simple soft-bodied organisms such as algae and worms, okay? I think what I'll do is I'll leave this like this. Is this better?
Yeah, we can see it. Yeah, it's fine. Without the slide show, it's okay.
Great, okay. Where was I? Yeah. The mutualistic relationship between certain fungi, mosses, and lichens is thought to have originated about 460 to 480 million years ago. And these simple plants began to colonize the terrestrial environment. They were in need of efficient nutrient acquisition strategies and formed mutualistic relationships with the fungi to access nutrients that were otherwise difficult to obtain, okay? I'm not sure how to move this now. Is it moving?
It's still on the mycorrhiza fungi.
Oh, gee, peruse. We're gonna just have to go like this then.
Yeah, okay. Let's use that.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. So this is just showing the mycorrhizal fungi and the algae and the lichens. Basically, they had to have this mutualistic relationship so that they could get nutrients where the nutrients that were embedded in the rocks, the minerals, were not available to the plants. They used the fungi to do this, okay? Now, we've all heard about photosynthesis. As plants evolved to become more complex, they developed stomata under their leaves to produce simple carbohydrates through the process we all know as photosynthesis. And for many years, we've been taught that plants use all of this energy selfishly for themselves. What we were not taught, however, is that the plant and fungi evolutionary mutualistic relationship from way back then, it continues to this day, and it's vital for healthy plants and a healthy planet. plants share between 30 to 40, sometimes more, of their carbohydrates as root exudates in the rhizosphere or the root zone. They do this to feed the soil microbiome, mainly fungi and bacteria, in exchange for water and minerals. The arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, as they're known today, form vital mutualistic relationships with a wide range of plant species, including thousands of those that we grow for food today. They are absolutely essential for food security. We know that the root exudates are not just standard. They are in fact tailored to manage the plant needs. We also know that different microbes can avail different nutrients and minerals to plants based on the chemical signals they receive through those root exudates. It's really quite magical how plants influence and shape the rhizospheric microbiome. Modulation of the composition and abundance of root exudates also influences the expression of a wide group of microbial genes, particularly those related to plant beneficial traits. And since the composition of root exudates depends on the developmental stage and the physiology of the plants, it's not surprising that changes in environmental conditions, climate or season, also affect the rhizospheric microbial communities. Here we get a close-up look on the expansion of a plant's root capacity with the inclusion of mycorrhizal fungi. On the left there is the plant by itself with its roots. On the right, it's where it now has mycorrhizal fungi working with it. It enables a plant to access 40 times larger reach in terms of water, minerals, and nutrients, because plants can't walk. It's absolutely vital. This diagram of the soil food web shows the interconnectedness between the organisms I've just been discussing and higher trophic soil organisms that are also vital for healthy soils. We know a healthy, balanced soil food web consists of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, including amoeba, flagellates, and ciliates, root bacterial fungal, as well as predatory nematodes, micro and finally macroarthropods. We know that these contribute to good soil structure and integrity, increased yields, protection from pests and disease, reduced irrigation requirements, no need for synthetic fertilizers, weed suppression, and protection against soil erosion. And finally, the soil food web contributes enormously to carbon sequestration. As we know, when the plants draw down that carbon dioxide, the microbes in the healthy soil lock this carbon in the ground, which is how the microbes in the soil brought our world from 4,000 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to 280 when humanity could actually survive. Before that, it was inhospitable. And as we're seeing, our damage in agriculture is raising those carbon dioxide levels from 280, we're at 420, and we know we're going to bypass the 1.5 degree mark. And a lot of that has got to do with our agriculture practices. 10 to 12,000 years ago was when man started agriculture. And in those days, we used very rudimentary tools. Hand plows, oxen, djembes. We didn't do too much damage. Intensive agriculture started 100 years ago. And that's when we started to totally and absolutely decimate the soil microbiome faster than it could repair itself. According to FAO, in the last 40 years alone, we've destroyed 33% of the world's topsoil. And by 2050, this figure will be 90% if we continue with our agricultural practices as usual. We're already experiencing a tragic drought in Kenya as we speak. If we want to address food security, we must, and we simply must, make the soil microbiome center stage of all of our discussions. For the past 2 years, I've been studying the soil food web and assessing the microbes in soils and soil amendments, composts, vermiculture, teas, and extracts. I've looked through hundreds of samples of soils from across the country, from smallholder farmers, and I'm astounded at the difference one can see between soils that are lacking in microbes, essentially dead, compact, degraded, and soils that are alive. The relationship between healthy crops and a healthy soil microbiome is so tangible when you look through it at a magnification of 400 times. Yet, this is invisible to all of us on our farms. And this is what I feel needs to change. In June 2021, I started a short course teaching soil advocacy to interested individuals in Kenya using Zoom. A year later, in May 2022, I began to teach a second course in soil microscopy, sharing the images from my microscope over Zoom with several students across the country. Being able to visualize the life in soils was an absolute game changer. It gave us all baselines to work from as we implemented ways to build our soil life, starting with very simple, practical activities like composting and keeping our soils covered at all times to ensure the microbes in the ground receive sugars from the plants above. This evolutionary mutualistic partnership results in the microbes building soil aggregates and sharing micronutrients and water back to the plants in a regenerative cycle powered by the soil food web. We learned that our agricultural practices of clearing, plowing, tilling, destroying the soil microbiome and resulting in degraded soils, but that we can turn it around in a single season. The problem that I have with GMOs, if I can just interject at this point here, is the reliance on herbicides for GMO crops, and herbicides actually even any cropping system. Because what we do with herbicides is we kill the pioneer plants. We kill the plants that are continuing to feed the microbes under the ground, even as we destroy the topsoil. Those pioneer plants, we call them weeds, and we destroy them. Without them, our microbes die. They are the ones that can survive the harshest conditions. We don't recognize them as pioneers. The fact that they're there is because we've disrupted the soils. We have so disrupted them that only weeds will grow. And then we think that it is the right thing to do is just to get rid of the weeds. Anyway, moving on, I'm going to show you how we can change this. This next slide is a series of pictures from one of my students in Trans Nzoia. He's here in the meeting today. Many students have similar stories. Paul Mwigai began to manage his maize crop using the information he learned in class and following regenerative practices of zero tillage and the use of vermiculture, which is earthworm, tea and extracts as a form of plant protection and nutrition, as well as microbial inoculation for his plants and for his soils. A former conventional farmer, Paul used to spend 15,000 shillings an acre in inputs, and from his 7-acre parcel of land, he was formerly harvesting 14 90-kilogram bags of maize per acre. The season Paul changed to adopting regenerative practices, his input costs dropped to under 1,000 shillings an acre, and he had an increased yield from 14 to an average of 20 bags per acre. He claims in all his years of farming, he has never had such yields. Interestingly enough, due to the high interest and demand of his neighbors and his friends, Paul's now started a company called the Soil Revolution, offering consultations on regenerative agriculture. Paul is a great example of how agriculture can be different, safe, productive, and profitable by combining information on the soil microbiome in a farmer's toolkit of knowledge. He and all the farmers across Kenya that are following practices that regenerate soils are a beacon of hope that we must recognize, amplify, incentivize, and encourage, as these farmers will ensure Kenya's food security. My next example will show you that we're almost there. Earlier this year, my team and I at iCow deployed a micro-survey to farmers using the iCow app with an aim to find out about soil health, production activities that may influence soil health, and farmer knowledge on the soil microbiome. Within a week of deploying our survey over mobile phone, and out of interest, these were not farmers with smartphones. This data was gathered from the field, from farmers directly inputting data into our system over their Mulika Mwizi phones. Those are the small, low-end feature phones. We had responses from just under 1,000 farmers from 45 of Kenya's 47 counties. Okay, this is just gives you an idea of how expansive and how quickly, if we use technology, we can find the problems and we can make and work on solutions for these problems at scale. An astounding 88% responded that they were experiencing declining yields over the years. And of these, 66% didn't know why their yields were declining. If you extrapolate this across the country, it is a disaster in the making. Many use synthetic fertilizers or a combination of synthetic fertilizers and cow manure. Half use compost, but 90% plow or dig their soils. Now, these very actions contradict each other as we build the microbiome and then actively destroy it, having to start literally from scratch the following season. Most didn't know about life in their soils. Most wanted to learn about life in their soils and the importance of this life to their soil health. What this survey and Paul's story show us is that our farming practices directly impact on soil health and productivity. We're decimating the soil microbiome every single day. We know that crop productivity is not driven by synthetic nutrients, but rather by a healthy soil microbiome. If we extrapolate the response from the first question of our micro-survey slide to an entire nation, our declining yields are endemic year on year. And if we consider that our declining yields are due to soil degradation, then the solution to food security in Kenya is not GMOs, but rather focus on soil health, health of the soil microbiome. If we look after the soil microbes, they will look after us. They are already 500 million years of research and development gone into how to make healthy soils. We can fix this. The question we need to ask ourselves as a nation is, are we really addressing the root cause of food insecurity? Are seed the problem? Our data from thousands of farmers across multiple micro-surveys doesn't support this notion. We must be brave enough and daring enough to explore new ways to fix the real root cause, rather than in our desperation, jump onto a solution that's been around for now 3 decades and as of yet hasn't delivered on its promise of solving food security across the world. Why are we here? We must dare to take bold action and pioneer a national solution that can be emulated across our country, our continent, by our people, for our people. Should we be genetically engineering seeds to grow in failed soils that further exacerbate the soil degradation due to their reliance on herbicides that destroy soil life? Or should we be working diligently and responsibly at fixing soils to support unadulterated seeds? Whose interests do GMOs actually serve? Do GMOs fix degraded soils? No. Do GMOs increase water retention? No. Will they create a dependency on food imports? Yes. Will they lead to loss of seed sovereignty? Yes. Will they lead to loss of food sovereignty? Yes. And should Africa invest in solutions that result in other countries feeding us? I think we all agree that that should be an absolute no. Adopting GMOs is an issue of both human rights as well as environmental ecosystem rights. We make a decision that affects a soil microbe, which underpins all life above the soil. We risk driving our beautiful country into a backward spiral of unprecedented food insecurity, And it will start in the farmers' fields, the fields of our food producers. If we adopt GMOs, we risk literally losing the ground we stand on, ecologically, politically, economically, as well as socially. We can do better, and we really must. So I'd like to end my presentation with 4 recommendations that I believe can steer our country in a new, healthy, regenerative, and prosperous direction, not only healthy for soils, but healthy for us. If our soils are healthy, so are we. 1, I think we should make microbial analysis a legal and fundamental component of all soil testing carried out in the country. Most soil tests in Kenya look at nutrient availability. They don't look at beneficial microbial availability. We know that microbes, using their acids and enzymes, make seemingly locked up nutrients soluble and plant available. Growing the soil microbiome is the most cost-effective solution for food security as well as climate resilience. Our comparative soil and soil amendments, microbial and nutrient test results with the International Livestock Research Institution showed that samples showing high nutrients also had incredibly high microbial levels. And conversely, samples with poor nutrients showed equally poor microbial levels. We can't ignore the science. Daktari before me, you're right. We cannot ignore the science or the data. The correlation between healthy soils, food security, and a healthy soil microbiome is incredibly measurable. We need to be better at measuring. 2, we need to create a national soil microbe database. We can't manage what we do not measure. As I mentioned earlier, there is no country on the African continent yet that measures the soil microbiome. It does not need to be done by genome sequencing. It doesn't need to be difficult. There are a few tens, not even hundreds, tens of community scientists now who are getting trained and who are able to avail these services to smallholder farmers, just using high light compound microscopes and armed with the knowledge and the qualifications and certifications to do so. It's not rocket science, it can be done, and we need to really think about doing this better. We need to remove or ban agricultural inputs and practices that adversely affect the soil microbiome. We can't be saying, let's do both. We go 1 step forward and 2 steps backwards. Since Kenya's independence, we've been slowly degrading our soils. We've tried everything. We've gone from, I don't know how many, just recently there was a report in the paper about the fertilizer subsidy campaign done by 3 different government regimes, and how all of them, the data shows that increased fertilizer does not result in increased yields. In fact, it is the opposite. One point where the fertilizer subsidy was cancelled, yields that year were up by 28%. The data is there, we have it. I think that we need to invest in a 10-year nationwide regeneration campaign. Last year, when I gave this presentation, that's what I said. And I hope that Kenya would take action and be the first on the African continent to do that, to lead. But I'm so proud and so happy to hear and see that Her Excellency, President Samia Suluhu, last month launched an 8-year agroecology campaign in Tanzania. She knows, and Tanzania will lead the way. Should we be following Tanzania? Maybe. We still have time to get ahead of the curve and lead from the front. And finally, we need to invest in water harvesting, conservation, storage, drip irrigation, and shade netting at farm level. Nothing will grow without water. Our data shows that most smallholder farmers don't have water storage facilities, and those that do have on average less than 5,000 litres capacity used across livestock, crops, and homes. This equates to a few weeks' worth of water when the taps run dry and a drought sets in. Our agro dealers are extremely important players in the sector. Let's equip them with the tools and the solutions for promoting soil health, as opposed to those that decimate the same and contribute to overall food insecurity. And my last note there is about the farmers. Let's incentivize, recognize, and reward farmers who are protecting our most valuable assets, our soils. My company does that. We have a microbial award process that we started last year. The individuals that you can see holding up their trophies and certificates are those that took my course, sent their samples in, and we rated their samples. The spin-off effect was amazing. When those trophies went back to the field, the picture at the top there, the group from Makueni, where there were 6 to 8 individuals who'd taken the course, they went back and they did a round trip around Makueni in the villages and the different wards with the trophy and inspired farmers on the ground because they want to win again next year. We need to think of innovative ways of celebrating our soil advocates and growing our soil advocates in this country. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Sue Kahobi, for a very clear presentation on regenerative agriculture. And we had Dr. Ali who had presented the issue of the GMO and the issue of the myths associated with that. Now we as the agriculture extension officers, of course, have received a lot of information which will be very useful for us to make informed decision. So we have disabled the Q&A in the chat, but what we would want is that because we have very many participants from the attendees list, you'll be able to raise up your hand, and then our ICT will be able to unmute you, and then you can be able to ask your question. Be very simple and be very specific to where you are focusing your question on, and let us focus on our deliverable here. We are trying to get as much information as possible, which can be able to enable us to advise our farmers based on informed information and knowledge. So I would really open the floor at this moment. You can raise up your hand, then I'll be able to ask our ICT to unmute you. I can see the first one, we have Lucy Mwangi. So Sophia, you can unmute Lucy Mwangi and let her ask her question. Sophia?
Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lucy Mwangi. I'm an agriculture extension expert based in Kigali, Rwanda. I'm from Kenya. I provide advisory services here in Kigali. So thanks the two presenters for your presentation. So I just have a few questions or a few comments. First, in the first presentation, we are told about the contamination between the GMOs and the other crops. And here we are talking about proximity to avoid contamination. But we all know that the smallholder farmers in Kenya, you know, they are really smallholder, like they are close to each other. So here my question is, how close or what is a safe distance to avoid contamination between the GMOs and the other crops? What is a safe distance, and how is the government or look forward to taking care of this as they introduce GMOs into the country? My second observation is that we are told that GMO does not destroy the environment. But in my observation, I see that it's the farming practice. And she cited the overuse of herbicides. So here we are looking at both the GMO and GMO crops will both affect the environment if we do not follow the appropriate farming practices. So my question is, how is the government looking at introducing the capacity building of the farmers on the good farming practices? Dr. Kambu has just explained the very many good farming practices. So how are we going to look at this, you know, like to ensure that as much as you are growing either GMO or non-GMO, the farming practices are the appropriate ones. And I've also have another comment or observation, because again, the doctor told us that GMOs do not cause cancer. However, consumption of aflatoxin contaminated maize will cause cancer. I come back to the issue of the root cause of the food security issues in Kenya. Is it the farming practices, or is it having GMO and non-GMO seeds? Because if both GMOs and non-GMOs are affected by aflatoxin, then it means the same problem will continue, whether you have GMO and GMO, if the farmers are not really build their capacity on the farming practices, especially the post-harvest practices. And my next observation is that studies show that GMOs are actually ill adapted to extreme weather, especially droughts. So what we are saying here is that GMOs are not going to grow without water. Actually, Dr. Kahubu has clearly said this, that nothing will grow without water. So we are introducing GMO seeds which are quite expensive. And I expect that we are expecting that once we grow the GMO, whether there is drought or not, it's like the production will just be good. But my question is, why can't we address moving from rain-fed agriculture to irrigated agriculture? And just like the presentation was very clear, we need to do something about water conservation. So in conclusion, I think that the message we should take out there is that GMOs are not the panacea, like the solving the problem for food security in the country. In my observation, what will solve the problem is the farming practices, and also how we enable the farmers, like to conserve water, to take care of the soil, to use like the manure, the organic farming. For me, I think that is what we should be looking at, but not looking at it that if we introduce GMO, then we have solved our problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Quite a mouthful, a number of points. Some are observation, others are comments, but you have specific questions which you have listed. Okay, I would want to take 2 or 3 more before we allow the panelists to respond. And we can see some of them, we are also going to respond, we as KEFAS. So any other hand which is up from our attendants? Yes, we have one question from Professor Maina Mwangi. Professor.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter, and thank you to Sue and to Dr. Anami. Peter, mine is a comment. I don't know whether I phrase it as a question, but what I wish to observe, what can be different about this forum which KEFAS has organized? And the question was, even as we may not have agreement on which way to go, but how do we facilitate a balanced dialogue between those who are for and those who are not for the GMOs? For me, I wanted, in fact, to ask, but having seen from the participation last time, I wanted to ask the people who would help us to communicate to the rest of the stakeholders, to the farmers, to consumers, to policymakers, because I do feel that there is a level to which even we have created, the experts have created confusion amongst these other groups, because we don't seem to agree, even, there's no convergence. And for me, that this is a question, why is there this very deep misunderstanding? What can we do to improve clarity in communication, even whatever our position is, so that we can remove bias? This is a question I am asking because we have a lot of knowledge, as is clear from Sue and from Dr. Anami, yet people in this country are going hungry. There is a proverb in Namibia where people say they are dying of thirst while standing in water. We are almost in this kind of situation, so much knowledge, and yet hunger is killing our people. the question is, what do we need to do differently to push forward this discussion? At least we come to some kind of agreement on the way forward. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Professor. Very, very pertinent question, because I'm sure we have learned from everybody, from Dr. Kari and from Sue. A lot of knowledge is there. But now, our country, we are suffering from hunger, drought, and all that. So we have Lamek Mwenda. Sylvia, you can unmute Lamek. Lamek, you can unmute yourself now and talk.
What?
Lamek Mwenda, yes.
So I was just asking a question concerning the reproducibility of the seeds that will be given as to the farmers, because there's someone who asked who raised a question well, the places that we are concerning the terminator sequence, that maybe where you find that the hybrid seeds for the when you plant for the first season, they'll give you a good produce, but for the subsequent seasons, you find that you're not able to get the product in you're not able to get good produce in the subsequent seasons. That was my question. Maybe
yes.
Maybe you can get an answer from that.
Thank you very much, Ramek. I'm sure we are going to respond. Then we have Wajiro Kamau. We have the last, then we can be able first to respond. That one will be our first set of questions. We'll be able to take another set. So Wajiro Kamau, unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Kefas, for reorganizing.
Unmute yourself. You have unmuted. You have muted again.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Go on.
Yes. Yeah, my name is Wanjiro Kamau. I work as a technical advisor to BIBA Kenya, which is a civil society organization that keeps stakeholders aware and alert about issues around biotechnology. We have a very clear position. Our position is no to GMOs. And we say that from a point of having looked at other countries in the world that have adopted this technology, and how smallholder farmers, the price smallholder farmers have paid for adapting this technology. And when we look at the adaptation, the way it's been adapted and the risks, we are concerned that we might follow the same trend. And but I want to first congratulate the presenters. I think they both brought out their cases very well. I was particularly happy with Sukahumbu, who I have worked with on the issues of regenerative agriculture. One of the issues I have with science around the GM technology is that I feel there isn't complete honesty when Daktari said that Dr. Seralini, Professor Seralini's paper was discredited. The true position is that it was retracted from the Journal of Food Toxicology, but republished in another journal in exactly the same way, without any changes, with the same findings. So I think it's not a complete story to tell people it was discredited and discredited and not published again. The correct position is that it was republished. The other thing I think, and we have not discussed this, is about how the regulation of the technology. When we look at South Africa, where GM technology has been commercialized, the regulation, the complexity, the use of the fact that farmers will now have to have a certain amount of their land, no less than 20% used as refugia. This is not told to farmers. So for instance, if a farmer has 10 acres of maize, at least 20% of that maize will have to be used for refugia to slow down the building up of resistance by the pests to the GM technology. So when we look at all those intricacies and the cost of regulation, like now if we look at commercialization of BT cotton in the coast, Taita Taveta, there isn't enough information coming out on what farmers are going through. There were complaints about the high cost of seed, which is an issue we have raised. There was reports in the media that farmers are buying the seed at 2,200 per kilogram of maize, of cotton, whereas the first seed they were given free. We have had reports that the seed is being given by the county government and not available through agrovets like normal seed would be. So we find there's a lot of secrecy, there's a lot of non-transparency around regulation and use of GMO. And we find in Kenya, only the scientific community seems to be pushing this agenda. So when we look at all those things, we feel like from a civil society perspective, I think there isn't enough transparency, there isn't enough openness about this technology, and we find the agenda is mainly being pushed by the scientific community, which we think is a conflict of interest because a lot of research is funded by multinational companies. So we are very, very concerned about this technology, and we are sure it's not going to offer a solution to the food insecurity and our poor soil health, as well explained to Suka Humbo. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wajiro. We have gotten the point. And of course, we have actually organized a series of webinars, and we are going to get experience from South Africa. We are in touch with South Africa, and we'll be part of the team which will be presenting next. That is the next series of webinar. So I think we have taken a number of them, so we can be able to get response. We're starting from the one from Lucy about the way of the distance between the GMO and of course the conventional seed and proximity. I'm sure each one of us was taking the questions, although I have noted them. But I'd like to invite Daktari to start by responding some of the issues which I have raised, and then I'll be able to invite Sue, and of course we'll be able to give general reaction. So Daktari, the floor is yours. Lamek and Wajiro, you can put down your hands if it's the old one. If it's the new one, then I'll be able to give you an opportunity. So, Daktari.
So thank you very much for the participants who have asked questions. I'll go to Lucy Mwangi. And if you allow me, I could share my slides to be able to give her the exact safe distances in which you try to find coexistence between GM and non-GM. Is that possible, if I can share?
Yes, you can share, yeah.
Yeah, so here it is. I hope Lucy Mwangi is following.
Yes, Daktari, I'm following.
Yeah, that's very good. So this was one of the concerns that people raised and you've raised, and I brought it in this particular webinar. The truth of the matter, and I agreed, is that pollen can move DNA across. But if you look at your right, there is a table there that gives you the exact safe distance that you need to keep the separation between GMO and non-GMO. So for example, for maize, it's 50 meters or 20 meters, but that is actually related to the cross-fertilization level. So what is the chance that actually within this distance, there will be cross-pollination? So that cross-pollination level, if you look at those figures, they are actually negligible. So we try to encourage that in the event that GMOs are actually allowed in the country, these safe distances, exact safe distances, need to be applied for those who are concerned about contamination. And so it's very interesting that the second part of it was about the environment and what is the government doing to ensure that proper agronomical practices are actually enforced, or even some kind of training, so that whether those who are planting GMO, they understand what they have to do. This one I agree, but I cannot speak on behalf of the government. I'm just a scientist, and I will only speak for myself, and what I speak will be from me. So that have to be very careful that in fact we encourage, especially for our small scale farmers, that in the event that we have a new technology, that particular technology needs to have, or a country needs to have the capacity to shepherd the technology. And once the technology has been shepherded, it is important that the small scale farmers and even the extension officers like yourself are trained on the proper agronomical practices that are necessary for one to achieve increased yield or production and productivity. And so the third part of it, of your question, was about GMOs and cancer, and whether GMOs will actually, and then you also talked about aflatoxin. And if you go to my slides, I've talked about this, that it has been demonstrated scientifically, and evidence is there, that GMO maize that is actually carrying the PT toxin also provides protection against aflatoxin up to 90%. That means, therefore, that if you plant GMO, the risk for cancer is minimal. So I would advocate for the fact that it's important to prevent such a risk to cancer by having such a contaminants of aflatoxins, prevent them by actually planting a GMO maize carrying a BT gene. And then you talked about water. I mean, nothing, even GMO, can grow without water. But what we advocate for is that genetic modification technology has the potential to develop crop plants that are resistant or tolerant to water or drought, which means if you provide minimal amount of water, you will still be able to achieve substantial amount of yield. And a good example is what I actually showed you. It was about the Wema maize, which I think, where is it? Wema maize, Wema. Is it lost? Oh, I don't see it here, but I talked about the Wema maize, which has been developed by a combination of genetic engineering and classical breeding. And farmers in this country have benefited. I think the trade name of the of maize is called Teco, and it's actually sold in our supermarket. So this technology that's actually complementing other technologies is much more useful. Maina Mwangi, how do we move forward? I disagree with your argument that we are all at distinct points. My thinking is that GMO technology and organic farming using agroecological farming practices need to come together on the table. There is no way, as another, I think somebody asked about the fact whether this GMO is the only solution. It's not. And I said it's not the only solution for food security, but it's an essential tool to complement these other technologies, like, for example, even improvement of the soil microbiome, like the one that Sul has actually talked about. And I will demonstrate to you that it's possible to use genetic engineering to improve soil microorganisms so that we can have a regenerative soil health that is of higher quality. And so in my moving this debate forward, is very clear that people should get all the information that's available, and that on the basis of the information that is available, they should be able to make their own informed choice as to whether they want GMO or they do not want GMO. But we cannot leave that decision to those people who are completely against a new breeding technology. Even classical breeding was a technology that came in. even organic farming, and even the use of microorganisms, you must be able to isolate the best microorganisms that gives you the best results in terms of yield. You cannot just say you are using all the microorganisms to be able to improve soil regeneration. Lamek Mwenda, terminator technology and whether the seeds are reproducible. I want to give you a very simple example. This country and all over the world, we have adopted the hybrid system. And the truth of the matter is that the hybrid system, once you plant and you have your first harvest, farmers in this country do not replant seeds from the first harvest. In the next planting season, they go back to the agrovet and buy a similar hybrid seeds. And therefore, what we are saying is that it is not so much different from a GMO technology. The fact remains is that after the first harvest, you can replant both GMO and non-GMO, especially the hybrids. But the quality of this maize in terms of growth and development is reduced as generation goes on. So I have talked about this terminator technology, and I've said that the GMO that will be developed in this particular country, by the way, we have no GMO in the country. So the GMO that will be grown in this country or be brought in this particular country will not have the terminator technology. And it's true internationally, we have a moratorium on the development, design, and in fact, deployment of the terminator technology. And that this technology, which is the GMO technology, has been given to us by, to Africans royalty free. So we cannot be able to pay anything on this particular basis. And then we have Wanjiru Kamau. She's a good friend of mine. I've met her at least once, and she has very valid concerns. And to me, in my opinion, it's your right to be able to reject a GMO. But for me, in my opinion, I call it that let this GMO technology come on the table to try resolve the agricultural challenges that the organic farming, that the agroecological farming practices have been unable to resolve. Because you advocate for agroecological farming practices. Yes, they are powerful and robust. But the truth of the matter is that farmers are still experiencing devastation in their farms due to pests, due to diseases, due to drought, and in fact, even malnutrition in this particular country. So if we have another technology that can be able to complement what you believe in, I do not see any problem. I do not reject agroecological farming practices. I say, let them all be on the table to be used by our small-scale farmers to address the agricultural challenges. And then you also talked about the regulation. And I'm not an expert in regulation. Maybe in the next webinar, they will call somebody who is an expert in the regulation. But what I can only say is that in this country, we have the National Biosafety Authority, and we have even up to 8 regulatory agencies that oversight on issues about GMO. And that heavy regulation to me suggests that GMO safety is in fact verified. Of course, you say and go further and say that GMO will not offer a solution to food security. I want to be very clear. GMO is not and may not be the only solution. It's not, it cannot be. But the truth of the matter is that you need to stop looking at GMO holistically and globally. You have to look at GMO specifically because these GMOs are developed for a specific trait. And the trait, if it is, resistance to insect pests, that is what it is. It's not coming in, and in fact, it has been demonstrated scientifically that a GMO that has been engineered to resist insect pests and specifically the Maidstone borer, sometimes it becomes compromised compromised by being infected by other insect pests or fungi or even bacteria. So we need to be very specific and take every case by case so that we do not globalize GMO as the only solution. It's not. It has come to complement these other technologies. But just to mention something about Asulu, she talked about the soil microorganisms, which are very important, and that's why she's rejecting a GMO. I want to bring her up to speed that there has been a demonstration, especially in the United States, that GMO, especially in rice, has been engineered to be able to produce a specific secondary metabolites and release it into the soil. That specific metabolite enhances the accumulation of bacteria around the roots of that particular plant. And we call that the biofilm. The accumulation of that particular biofilm, it was demonstrated that they enhanced biological nitrogen fixation without the application of inorganic fertilizer. And therefore, you can see how a new technology with its robustness can be able to resolve all or most of the problems, agricultural problems that we are having. In fact, I disagree. I agree with you that inorganic fertilizers are not the best for our soil health. That I agree. But these kind of solutions, innovative solutions through genetic engineering are the ones that we need. And therefore, I argue that let's have this technology in this country. For that reason, therefore, I think I'm done with the comments.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ali. I think it's becoming very interesting. We had invited the National Biosafety Authority last time. They actually participated. But he said he had an issue because of the ongoing court case, but they actually sat in even last time, and they'll be available to give us this. We'll be able to put them. Remember, our focus is information to extension so that they can be able to reach the last mile. I can see there is a lot of convergence, and of course, they are a bit of divergent in some issue. I want now to invite Sue to respond to quite a number of issues. I don't know whether you are taking them, Sue.
Yes, thank you very much. Sorry, my system, my internet went down, but it's back up now. So a few things here. I like the questions. I like that people are thinking deeply about the knock-on effects of bringing in technologies and not just looking at them through a siloed lens, but looking at them holistically across human, animal, plant, soils, and the environment, okay? When we've looked at I think this was brought up by Lucy Mwangi, when we looked at the issues around the pollinators, okay, and the spread of pollination, contamination of GMOs. I looked at that, the chart also very closely, the chart that Dr. showed us. Now, most of us know that insects that are pollinators travel far and wide. Bees have a radius of, I think it is a diameter of 2 kilometers from their hives. That's how far they forage. Bees are not the only pollinators. There are ants, there are flies, there are bats, there are moths. We have some very good entomologists in this country, Dr. Dino Martins being one of them. And he's written a lot of books about the pollinators, how they forage and how far they forage. So there is no way that we will ever be able to stop the cross-contamination if we forget, if we don't take into account that it will be on flight of insects and things that we must not be eradicating, because then we're actually damaging our biodiversity. Okay, so that's my first one there on the pollinators. Lucy also questioned whether it is our actions and our activities of agriculture that are the problem, less the inputs and the solutions we're looking at. And I want to talk about aflatoxins, okay? Aflatoxins generally come about when maize is not dried to 13 degrees humidity, okay? Most farmers, in most conditions, do not have the instruments to check that their maize is dried to that level. And therefore, and some, whether you're drying off the cob or on the cob, if there's any level of moisture left in that maize when it's dried and stored, there is the risk of contamination. We've proved, and many people have proved, that if you teach how to dry properly, if you do simple tests like the salt test, taking a handful of dried maize, putting it inside a glass bottle with a teaspoon of salt and shaking it. If the salt adheres to the glass, there is still humidity. If the salt slips off the glass, that maize is dried. We have seen, we have data to prove that dried maize can be measured and monitored and improved at farm level. But who is taking the effort to teach the farmers? In all honesty, where is the education component that is going to farmers? There's not a lot. What we do is we deal with farmers' problems. We don't build their acumen. We're not building their resilience. We are letting the agro-dealing system degrade their soil systematically over time because we're not investing in education and extension as we should be doing. And that's why I think that KEFAS is very important. We're having this discussion. How are farmers supposed to know some of these things? Where do farmers go? When do they take their soils to be checked? When they have problems. And when you have a problem, and I'm going to come back to Daktari, where you talked about specific microbes in the soil. I disagree with you entirely. We must be looking at diversity of microbes in the soil. Full-on diversity, the full soil food web. We cannot prioritize certain microbes against others and insist that those are the ones there. That creates an imbalance, okay? Have we mapped aflatoxins across the country? Have we mapped soil microbes? Have we mapped where some of the problems are and related it to the issues in the soils? No, we haven't. We just watch it and then think that if we bring in new seeds, and in the process, incidentally, of focusing on one or two great traits in those seeds, what damage are we doing? What are we not focusing on? I recall the director of ICIPE once giving a presentation about how dumb some of the hybridized and the GMO mazes are, because they don't react to the stimulus in their environments, because they've been damaged and they're unable to. In the process of following singular and definite traits, we don't look at the other things we've messed up. We all know that the microbiome, be it within our gut, within our soils, we know that diversity, whether it's diversity in our environment, in the atmosphere, or in the diversity in our forest systems, diversity in our planting systems, diversity absolutely leads the way to us being stronger and healthier, and plants being stronger and healthier. There are big questions people are asking about how come many of the developing nations, and especially on the African continent, people were not affected that much by COVID. And they're now beginning to point to our gut microbiome and the diversity in our gut microbiome, which is based on our diets, which is based on the microbes that we're even getting from the environment into our systems through our diets, versus the changes that happen when you go to fast food and very different high-fat, high-saturated fat diets that most of the developing world are following. Diversity is key. It should not be ignored. It should not be something we say, let us streamline and look at individualistic traits as being the way to solve these problems. Just back to Lucy again. Lucy Mwangi, thank you. I really appreciate what you're saying, because the reality is this: it is our production systems, and our production systems are the way they are for reasons. It is how we have taught our farmers, if they were taught at all. It is how we have interacted with them as extensionists. We normally interact when there's a problem. Most smallholder farmers have a very, very holistic production system. They have between 3 to 5 different livestock, 8 to 9 different crops and plants, including trees, including crops and plants that are growing in the ground. There is a multitude of diversity going on at the same time. Most of our extension services that are on the ground are narrow-minded across singular value chains, and this is wrong. It's supposedly there because of markets and things, but what it does is it creates systems that actually break down that resilience that smallholder farming systems have. When they go from a resilient system with a multitude of different organisms and fruits and trees and plants and livestock to monocropping, damaging the soils in the process and ending up with weak plants that are at the behest of pests and diseases. Strong plants do not get diseased. Strong plants do not get attacked by pests. The fact that we have, Daktari, so many issues with pests and diseases is because our plants are weak. And our plants are weak because they cannot build their strength, because their soils that feed them, the soils that work with them, are destroyed. So I leave my argument there. GMOs is a discussion that I don't even want to take on board as being a discussion worthwhile, because you take any of those, put those GMO seeds in our current soils and things, what are we going to say then? Eventually we'll get to a point where our soils are so hammered and GMOs won't work, and then we'll be thinking, oh, what should we have done differently? Because we can see it, we can measure it, but we're choosing not to. We are taking the easy way out. Buy inputs, sell them to farmers, and cross your fingers and hope it will rain and hope that we will have enough food to feed the nation. Today, we're importing over 37% of the food to feed Kenyans. This has happened in the last 10 years. And it's happened because as we've degraded our soils and ignored the signs, we're now importing food. And we will continue to import until we have nothing coming out of the ground. And we blame the farmers, yet I blame the extension system. And I blame the government. And I blame all the scientists who are not daring to look at the real issues. We do not have policy in place that protects soil microbes. They're the most important things on our planet. In Kenya, we do not have policy that protects soils or even that measures soil microbes. We do not have a scientific institution in this country that is focusing on soils. We focus on plants, we focus on livestock, we focus on flowers and horticultural things, we focus on coffee, we focus on tea. Where do we think they come from? Anyway, I think I've made my point quite clear. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Sue. You still have your hand up, so if it's a odd one, you can put it down. Thank you very much, because I can see there are a lot of convergences, and of course, we are saying there's a lot of divergence. And I'm told now the Q&A is open. You can be able to put your question in the Q&A session. That one has been activated so that we can be able to respond to that. So we'll be able to take one more from Lawrence Kitoga Muriuki. And then from there, if you have any other question, you can put it on the chat so that we can be able to have a summary from one of the rapporteur, so that we can be able to finish, because it's almost 2 minutes to 4. So we can be able to extend by 1 or 2 minutes. So let's first get one from Tonga. Lawrence, you can unmute yourself. And it seems, Lucy, if it's...
Yeah, Peter,
yeah.
I want to thank the two presenters for how they've responded to my questions and my comments. And if you allow me also, I'm rushing to another meeting. It would be okay for me to leave.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Thank you. We are going to have the next one on 17th of February. So you'll be able to share the information, where you'll be able to look at the policy framework. So thank you very much. So Lawrence Gitoga, you can also ask your question now. Lawrence, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm Lawrence Gitanga Murioki. I train farmers on agroecology in Murang'a. My question is, does GMO maize affect the other crops, or will GMO crops in one field affect the other subsequent crops that will be done in the same field after the harvest?
Thank you very much. I'm sure Daktari will be able to respond to that. But before Daktari responds, there is another one asking, can GMO change our human genes? It's coming from Charles Biddy. So Daktari, you can respond to those two. And then from there, I'll be able to invite Mercy to be able to give us a summary so that we can be able to finish. So Daktari.
Yeah, so thank you very much. Let me share. I think I answered all these questions in my share, especially Lawrence affecting other crops and in the soil field. Yeah, so will non-GMOs impact biodiversity? That's where I find the answer to your question. And if you see the last bulleted point, clearly there was an experiment that was done consecutively for 3 years in which PT corn maize were planted, and they were measuring the persistence and accumulation of the protein expressed from a genetically engineered maize. And they found out that this CRY1A protein could not persist, and it did not accumulate even in the subsequent years. So the answer is very clear that when you grow GMO maize, indeed, it will not affect other crops if you happen to plant in the same field. The other question, I don't know who asked, can GMO change our human genes? I don't think that's a possibility, or there is no evidence. Now, what I want to say is, let us not generalize this GMO as something which is different. I just defined GMO very simply that you take a small gene or a gene from this organism or a bacteria and transfer it to a plant for you to address a specific challenge. And so in that case, I will give you an example. Insulin has been produced through genetic engineering for a very long time. And it has not been demonstrated that that insulin, for those who are suffering from diabetes, has changed any human genes whatsoever. So there is no evidence that that can happen as I understand. Now to Lucy, just a little bit to my rebuttal. I agree with you that diversity is the way to go. But let's just give one example of the billions of microorganisms within our GTI. You realize that each of these microorganisms, which represent diversity, have specific roles. For example, it's not all those bacteria that can create the bioavailability of specific vitamins and deliver it for utilization. It is a specific microorganisms which can also be taken up and be genetically engineered to perform that specific role. So within the biodiversity where we find strengths, in that biodiversity, no, not biodiversity, but diversity, it's not that all of them have, in fact, some of them also cause diseases. Even if you look at all those particular diversity, they have negative consequences and others have positive consequences. So if you look at the diversity and narrow down to a specific microorganism that can deliver for you what you want, I will advocate for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Daktari. Thank you very much, Sue. So at this point, I would like to invite Mercy Boro to be able to give us just a quick wrap up of a summary of what has come out of this, and then I will ask Professor to thank the presenters on our behalf. So, Masebolo.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Peter, and thank you, everybody. Thank you for this chance. I just want to do a summary from the discussion that we've had today. And the objective was to be able to get as much information as possible so that we can be able to reach the last mile extension, who are the farmers with the right information regarding GMO. I'll start off with the two presenters. We had Dr. Anami, who took us through what GMO is. And I think he's kept on highlighting this. It's the introduction of exogenous genes from a not sexually related plant. And it is different from what plant tissue culture is, which is not a GMO. He also highlighted the difficulties of the constraints of classical breeding and why we need to focus on GMO. And some of this is the issues of inefficiency of the classical breeding, the time taken, and also the cost factors. And he also noted that horizontal gene transfer has been happening all through evolution. He also highlighted key benefits of GMOs from the issue of protection from aflatoxin contamination, controlling weeds, plant diseases such as MNLD, and also the insect pest, and also being able to use genetic engineering to be able to enhance the nutritional value of the crop, such as addressing issues of vitamin E deficiencies, and also addressing issues of climate change adversities such as drought. And he also gave examples of the Wema maize. He also highlighted the key crops that have been already the GMO crops that have already been commercialized, from the maize to cotton to soybean and all that. He also addressed the misinformation that we have regarding GMOs and their effects, the issues of men growing breast and women growing beards, the issues of cancer. And he also noted that GMOs are safe and beneficial from the biofortification, and that the GMOs will not take away the choice and exploit small-scale farmers, and that they'll also not harm unintended targets. However, he cautioned that it is possible for GMOs to contaminate wild populations, but the issue of cross-fertilization has extensively been discussed and what could be done to address issues of contamination. He also noted that GMOs will not impact biodiversity. If anything, they are going to reduce use of pesticides, and these will actually be able to enhance the soil microbiome. He also noted that GMOs on their own are not the only solution to food security, but rather complement other food nutrition security practices. And this has come on throughout the discussion. He also noted that it's not a terminator technology, and it is not aimed at promoting or benefiting the multinationals, because the seeds can be replanted and it is provided royalty-free to Africans. His key messages in terms of conclusion is that we need to be innovative and effective. He also noted that we also need to look at how we perceive science, and also the researchers and also the institutions that have been mandated to offer regulations with respect to genetic modification. And he noted that it is important that we trust what they are doing and the information that they are generating. He also noted that it is important that we adopt resilient crops, and he also gave examples of that. And he also noted that the GMO arguments anti-GMO discussions need to be backed by scientific evidence. And on to the second presenter, Madam Suka Humbu. She asked the key question on, are we really addressing the root cause of food insecurity in this country by possibly taking up GMOs? And she highlighted key issues, and particularly she laid more emphasis on the issue of the soil health. And there was the experiment that she from Dr. Johnson, and that synthetic nutrients are not really the ones to address the issue of the productivity, but rather we need to look into our soils. And once we'll be able to look into our soils, we will be able to address the issues of yields, the issues of pests and diseases, and also issues of carbon sequestration and the soil erosion. And he gave an example of where regenerative agriculture has actually been applied at the students that he was teaching during the COVID period over Zoom, and that they were able to apply regenerative agriculture practices, and their input use reduced significantly, as well as the yields also increased. From the survey that they also conducted, he noted that there's low levels of awareness on the causes of yield decline, and also the practices of regenerative agriculture in terms of how farmers are using them. There is mispractice in terms of using compost, but at the same time also plowing the land. And he noted that there is high willingness among the farmers to learn about the life in the soil. And also he noted that GMOs will not fix degraded soils. They'll also not address issues of water retention, and they're likely to increase dependency on imports, and also result in food dependency, and will also likely lead to loss of food sovereignty and seed sovereignty as well. From his presentation, he notes that we possibly need to do make microbial analysis compulsory for soil analysis, and also have a soil microbe database, and also control use of inputs that especially have adverse effects on soils, and also have a soil regeneration campaign, and also investments on issues of water, and also a reward mechanism. And from the discussions that we've had in terms of questions, key things have come out that we need a whole production system approach, whereby farmers not only pick up the technologies, but they also need to practice the good agricultural practices. There's the issue of capacity development, in terms of the regenerative agriculture, the good agricultural practices, and also in terms of the GMOs as well. There's also the issues of transparency and the regulation of GMOs that also needs to be looked into, and that GMO actually comes in to complement other technologies and not to replace them in entirety. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Must say you have really captured it well. And I think we have already exceeded 10 minutes. So we'd want to take this opportunity to sincerely thank everybody who was able to participate. Remember, we said this one is a series of webinars. We have 3 of them. The next one, we are planning it for 17th of February, and we'll be able to share information. And here we are going to have regulators who will be able to give us more information, so that we can be able to be more informed, because this one is to enable us as extension officers to have as much information as possible, so that we can be able to make informed choices. So on 17th, we'll be able to invite all of you again, and then we'll be able to see which direction we are taking out of this. So at this moment, I would want to thank you very much. Professor Maina was also supposed to pass a vote of thanks, but he dropped because he was going for another meeting, but I'm sure he will be able to do it next time. Otherwise, I would want to really wish you the best, and we are very happy as CAFAS because we are using this platform to build the capacity of the extension officers to be able to have to make informed choices. So to Dr. Ali, we are very, very happy from JKU Arts. It's a strong partnership. Thank you very much for a lot of good information you have given us, and I'm sure you'd be available to share more and more information. Sue Kahubu, you are one of us. Thank you very much for all the information you have given, and you'll be able to share. And to all participants, we are open for more and more collaboration because you can never do it alone. So thank you very much and have a pleasant afternoon, and let's meet on 17th. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.